Welcome to The Dreamboat. This is where we explore everything to do with dreams.
We are sponsored by the DRI Centre for Dream Studies, and you can find out more about our work in the show notes.
You can join us here every fortnight or at one of our dream courses, workshops, or retreats. Thank you for coming on board.
As the Nazis overtook Germany in the 1930s, could this massive upheaval in German society have revealed itself in people's psyches at the time? Did the impact of it all surface in dreams or in the collective unconscious in some way? Soon after Hitler seized power in January 1933, a Berlin journalist, Charlotte Beradt, who was Jewish, began having disturbing dreams, finding herself being hunted through snow-covered fields by stormtroopers at her heels. Charlotte secretly began collecting dreams from her friends and neighbours, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and preserved them as diaries of the night. She escaped to New York in 1939, and decades later, she pieced together these dream fragments and published The Third Reich of Dreams, an amazing insight into the psychological effects of totalitarianism, which has strong messages for the disturbing signs of the collapse of democracy today.
Out of print for 40 years, the work has been rediscovered by our guest today, a documentary film producer and director who has worked across arts, history, current affairs, and science for BBC One, 2, 4, Channel 4, Sky, and the History Channel, Amanda Rubin. While developing a film project about Charlotte Beradt's extraordinary life, Amanda stumbled across the lost English language rights to the book and has since been closely involved in republishing it with Princeton University Press. Alongside the film, she is also making a radio documentary for BBC Radio 4.
Yes, Amanda, it's such a pleasure and honour to welcome you to the Dreamboat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, lovely to have you on board. And I suppose the first question I really want to sort of ask you was, what struck you about Charlotte's work?
Well, I first read about Charlotte's work in an article in The New Yorker by a journalist called a writer called Mireille Duchow, who's Australian. She had come across the book in a sort of back of a dusty library at the University of Melbourne and was just really struck by the title, The Third Reich of Dreams. It's very sort of catchy. And so she wrote this New Yorker article, which was somehow just very compelling for me on two levels. One is, when I read it, we were in the middle of lockdown, and I mean, we all experienced it slightly differently, but I think what we all, had in common was the sense of this kind of distorting landscape, this sort of sense of being in this huge moment of history, not really knowing how it was going to turn out, still going about our daily lives as ever. We had to get milk, we had to walk dogs or educate children, but all around us was kind of news or fake news, people dying, just a real distorting environment. And there was some sort of parallel in a way that, we just didn't know what was going to happen. And I thought about the 1930s and this kind of slow creep. I mean, in some ways, we've got the headlines of history, but it was kind of what was happening beneath the surface, what was happening in people's everyday lives. How were you accommodating these changes in law, the changes in the ways people were behaving towards each other, etc. So at that level, it was kind of compelling, and the dream seemed to sort of write that, it's like writ large, that sort of inner adaptation that people were having to make. And also my family had escaped not Germany, but Belgium. Many had not escaped Poland. And that level of experience was not passed down to us. Well, maybe it was really deeply and is carried, but the discussion of it was not. So that sort of sense that, I kind of knew, again, the headline stuff, we got in a car and we drove south and we crossed the mountains at night and and we got on a ship and it was bound for China. I knew all of that. But what was that like every day to, the fear, the anxiety, the tension, this not knowing? And so somehow it sort of spoke to me. And then I began to research Charlotte's life story. So Charlotte was a young journalist in 1920s Berlin that we've all seen, the movies Cabaret and Weimar Republic, this kind of very energetic, kind of utopian time, and a time of great liberalism, women's rights. I discovered while researching, it was so, she drove, she was a model, she was rather glamorous, she was a writer, she was very fearless and joined the Communist Party. So that, she had this great energy about her. When Hitler came to power in 1933, very soon after, she was banned from working as a journalist because she was Jewish. Just a very assimilated Jew, like lots of people lots of Jews in Germany, particularly in Berlin, very assimilated, really felt German, had fought, had just didn't their Jewishness was not writ large for them, but banned nonetheless because she was Jewish. And she began to have a series of dreams that were disturbing. And then she thought, I must not be the only one having these kinds of dreams. So secretly, she began to ask people about their dreams. She collected some 300 dreams over a period of 1933 to 39. She then left in 39. They realized the writing was on the wall. And she escaped to New York. And there she had this other really fascinating life where she was a hairdresser in a little basement apartment. She had a little salon, like a literary salon and a hair salon. It's a great, and they reference it a lot as well. The emigre, intellectual writers and artists and poets, their wives came and had their hair dyed there. And she says, this is a great quote, and in the evening, we'd push the table aside and sweep up the floor and we'd have a party and we'd laugh a lot. And it's very sort of poignant somehow, this idea, and it was hard. They had no money. It was very, very hard. But then she kind of reinvents herself in the late 50s. She starts working with Hannah Arendt, the political theorist. They become friends. She translates for her. She runs her office while she travels. She's also in a kind of relationship with Arendt's husband, a kind of ménage à trois. And finally, she publishes the Third Reich of Dreams again. So I love the arc of her story. I was sort of reaching a similar age to the age that she was when she found her voice again, and I sort of was coming back to making films. There's something about that sort of story arc and that idea of women finding their voices again in later in life with more maturity. And so somehow her story, I think the idea kind of found me. I sometimes think Charlotte found me to tell her story.
Rina, when you read this material, because you came out of New York, it sort of had a great effect on you, didn't it?
It did, and that's we have a visual here. You will have seen me starting to really smile at that part of the story because you brought me right back to my childhood and my mother's childhood. Of those, I'm from New York, from Brooklyn, and these basement beauty parlors were often run by an emigre and these are very intimate places. This is where you go to have your hair done and you share your stories. And I remember as a little girl being brought along by my mother to some of these places. So it just evoked that confluence of the intimacy and the profoundness, the profundity of what brought them all together in that room and the tides of history. So yes, it really touched me that it's the intimate, because the dream world is so intimate, isn't it? So just casting that picture of that type of New York and finding your voice again amongst women and finding the voice to your inner life. Just beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that the metaphor of the hair, like the dyeing hair, is partly somehow about, putting on a different sort of face to the world somehow. I think hairdressers we also associate with sort of, talking, maybe, like you say, being intimate, sharing stories. And I think that's, there are all those sort of layers of, it's almost, also, when Lisa Appininesi, I did a talk with her at the Freud Museum, she talked about the idea of the hairdresser sort of standing behind you, like your like a psychotherapist or psychoanalyst of old, would sit behind you while you lay there and talked about your life, your dreams. And so there's something, some nice sort of parallel there.
Yeah, in fact, at one stage, they were actually training hairdressers to be counsellors because so they had improved their counselling skills because they recognised that it is where women, it is, as you said, Rina, it's very, very intimate. And so, and women, sharing groups. I was just thinking, Rina and I often talk about dream groups, and it's an extension of how we run dream groups where you all go and you share and you start recognizing threads and motifs that you share in dreams. Such a powerful experience. And I think for Charlotte to have found herself in such a group must have been comforting in some way, as well as creative.
Yeah. I think it was survival. Having said that, most of the dreams nearly all the dreams were collected between those years, 33 to 39. And they were secretly collected because it was dangerous. Anything that the regime might have seen as subversive would have been dangerous. She had already been arrested as a suspect in the Reichstag fire. So she was on the watch list of the police. She was in the underground. She was a resistance fighter, and not fighter, but in the resistance, she helped to print leaflets, and she crossed the border to Czechoslovakia a few times where her first husband was living. So, those dreams were collected in the 30s, and she wrote them in code just in case her apartment was, the police came to her apartment. She wrote them in code. She hid them in spines of books in her library. And then she sent them as letters abroad to friends. And she was reunited with them when she got to New York. But they just laid unlooked at. She wrote one article in 1943 for a newspaper called Free People, I think. I need to check. And then she just left them because she just needed to earn a living. So it was only in the early 60s that she sort of remembered she had them, and she was becoming, I suppose, more visible. And she started putting the ideas together into a book, which she finally published in 1966.
It's just fascinating because this, so we think of the work that we do is about undertaking spiritual transformation, and that is a lifetime's journey. So this is a lifetime arc of a story. But the ember, that spark, that genius spark, that when everything was taken away, this is existentially, this is what the move that she makes. I'm going to go collect dreams. Something is going on here. And in fact, what it has set up is the perfect experiment. You couldn't have designed an experiment for the parameters of an experiment better. To collect these things live in the moment and then have the benefit of history retrospectively to take a look at them is just brilliant. So as we were saying earlier, all the different weaving of different threads, all the things that needed to happen for this story to unfold is just quite incredible. It is a lifetime spiritual journey unfolding in Charlotte's life. And what a meaning it's been made of it, and the timing of it now for it to be coming back into consciousness now is just so helpful, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, and interesting as well. There's a synchronicity there, which I think is really important. Amanda, I suppose the question that most people will be asking is, so what were the themes in the dreams? What were the regular sort of motifs and themes that surfaced?
So the themes that, I think different people probably read and remember different dreams, and they sort of speak to them somehow. I think the dreams are very cinematic. That's why I instantly felt, could I make a film about this? So different dreams talk to people differently, but the overall themes that I think you see and are particularly a loss of self, the sort of subjugation of self, the the debasement, the way in which the regime, through propaganda, through the kind of violence that became normalized, and through that sense in which people began to self-censor, they lost themselves in that. So the loss of the individual. Also, the regime was, it was all about the group. It was all about narcissism. It's all about the collective. And so the individual gets lost in that. Self-censorship, as I say, is a huge one. So long before Orwell had written 1984, people imagined devices that could listen to them in their homes. It might be in an oven, sort of blaring command at them. It might be a pillow that was listening, that knew everything they'd said. So the idea of privacy, the privacy of your home, the privacy of the people you trusted it was sort of broken. And that's another theme, actually, is the kind of loss of human bond, the breaking of bonds between humans. The communication is a huge theme as well. So the means of communication, propaganda, falsehoods. There's a lot of times people dream of people who are faceless, or who don't have mouths, who don't, they don't talk, they don't step in to help, to say anything. They watch things happening. They watch people being humiliated or debased or degraded, and they don't step in. So this idea of that the group is not going to step in to help you. You are alone. There were lots of kind of wish fulfillment dreams, but not as Freud would have talked about them, but more that sort of desire of wanting to belong to the group, to not be othered. For Jewish dreamers, so these were the dreams of Jews and non-Jews. They were the dreams of people from all walks of life, anyone she had access to. The only dreamers that she didn't talk to were paid up party members, because that would have been dangerous for her. So we don't know what the dreams of actual Nazis of the time were. But this idea of wish fulfillment, so you've got a sort of shame and pride together. A doctor dreams he's the only one who can save Hitler, and he's proud of himself, but he's also ashamed of that. So that sort of sense of wanting to join the group, wanting to be a stormtrooper and march with them, those all come out. And there are these sort of erotic dreams as well, where women dream of wanting of dancing with Hitler, of being stroked by him, of being seduced by him. And there was a huge female adoration of Hitler, which he really played on. And then the other themes that come out are the themes of sort of resistance and conformity. And so the ways in which people were, that sort of invasion of the regime into the unconscious leaves people with all, sort of with this internal struggle about, do they conform? Is that easier? And one man dreams of he says, I dreamt I didn't have to say no anymore. So that idea of it just becoming too fatiguing to push away this great sort of tsunami of propaganda, of law, of change, where everything is kind of closing it.
Yeah, and also conformity, you not being able to say no.
Absolutely. Just there are only a few people who feel brave enough to actively resist. And she records some of those people's dreams. And interestingly, she talks about the strength of people's moral conviction came through in the dreams of those who were active resistors as well. So if you could hold on to that sense of what you're witnessing is wrong, and I'm not going to be part of it, and if that means I suffer, then I will go along with, that will be. Those dreamers, those resistance dreams are very powerful. And there's something that I hold on to, especially as the world is changing. How do we hold on to that sense of the moral rightness of what we know to be correct?
The Dreamboat is a project of the DRI Centre for Dream Studies. If you're the kind of person who is fascinated by the mystery of dreams and you want to learn more about the transformational power of dream work, check out our workshops, lectures, retreats, and training courses at driccpe.org.uk. Also on the website, you can support the podcast and all of DRI's work by becoming a member for just over £30 a year. That gets you discounts and first access for our ticketed events, as well as access to videos and extra material online. That's driccpe.org.uk, and you can find the link in the show notes. Now back to the podcast.
Rina, what do you make of some of these themes? I'm intrigued, as always, by the sort of sexual dreams and the desire to adore the oppressor. Has a bit of a Stockholm syndrome about it in some way. But what did you make of that, Rina?
Well, I think where I immediately went to was sort of a trauma framework of that these sound like trauma responses in terms of fawning or freezing or doing something in order to ensure survival. And of course, then the shame responses that then triggers in retrospect of like this. So this is how I would behave in the face of, I'm not this brave superhero who would go in and, so I think that's my first idea, especially the eroticization of it makes a lot of sense to me. It's that, the base chakra at our very base of survival it knows it's under threat. So what shape can I contort into in order to seduce, tame, bring on side the oppressor, the persecutor, who is also the one who will feed me? So it gets very complicated. And straight away, we're drawn to the ones who resisted, the ones who understood that this material body is just something we pass through. So therefore, it's the only meaning I can make is in my resistance. So I think that's why I find this particular podcast, this particular encounter with you so interesting, because it touches every aspect, leading us right to the existential of, the only thing that I can do is how do I position myself in this? Where do I place myself in this thing that's bigger than me, that's happening regardless of my choice or indication?
It reminds me of a client I had, a young man who was actually very disturbed, but he was a designer. And when he drew faces, we did a lot of drawing work. They were always faceless. They were completely depersonalized. It was like he was annihilating something intrinsic of himself. Sadly, he did go on to commit suicide. And so the fact that that theme has surfaced in the dreams of the Third Reich for the oppressed, it was a depersonalization. There was an annihilation that was about to happen or was beginning to happen. And I find it absolutely fascinating as a motif how that then surfaced within the collective unconscious, within the disappearing psyches almost of a lot of people.
What's interesting as well is, in contrast, you have to this sort of faceless and muted is the kind of these motifs that appear. So sort of shrill voice. There's often a sort of barking or a shrill shouting of propaganda or of commands. The voice that comes out of the oven is kind of shrill. There are these other sort of motifs of the regime marching. So there's a silence muteness against this shrillness. There's this shrill penetrating voice, the oven, the radio blares, the speeches. There are these marching stormtroopers, the sort of physical terror that symbolizes, banners and posters, laws and decrees being kind of blared out at people. It's this kind of constant sort of barrage of stuff, of noise, of violence and authority being kind of directed at people, which is quite terrorizing, sort of physically and psychologically. Those two elements come out very strongly in these dreams. And to your point, Rina, about you made earlier about the sort of brilliance of a dream collection, which, had this not been put together and had we not had the benefit of hindsight to know exactly what happened in this period, that those would have just disappeared, really. It's just something about this sort of collective and how they really witness history. And that's what she set out to do. She says, I recorded them, I collected them as a witness, as evidence against the regime. And there's a historian called Reinhard Koselleck, who in the 70s, he wrote an afterword to her second edition of her book in German. And he said that dreams are almost more reliable than any other witness account, that somehow there's such a sort of deep evocation and evidence of how, I think Bion talked about, I was reading about the idea of the meeting of dreams and history in this sort of body, this being the kind of repository of how history meet. Sorry, I'm going to start that again. The idea of dreams sort of mapping history onto the body. Somehow that is how how history is experienced by people. And so these dreams and our knowledge of what actually happened is so clever of her, really, to have. She didn't really know what was going to happen, but on that journey.
A true spark of inspiration, a true spark of genius. And his statement that you just quoted about the purity of the dream memory. It's not cognitized by the mind, which is going to employ rationalizations, ways of knitting a narrative around. As soon as you put language or mind on it, it changes something. So it's so perspicacious, that statement, that the body is mapping a memory that is just pure. It's undistilled by a cognitized rationalization, not touched by mind. It's just amazing. What you were saying before about the shrillness, and you kept coming back to that word, shrill and penetrating. Again, we're in the language of trauma, of it bombards the senses. And there is a trespass across a threshold of self, that penetrating shrillness and the relentlessness of it. It's incremental as the regime is building up and depersonalizing us, and total. So it's coming out from all that. So it's poetic, actually, the way it all comes together in this one story of Charlotte's.
The use of the word poetry, of the poeticism of it, the new edition, new translation that we managed to have published, I basically had started researching Charlotte's life story. And along the way, I was just trying to speak to anyone who might have had contact with her. She had died in 1985. I was really trying to reach out and find any, and it was very thin because she didn't have children. She just left a very sort of thin trail. And so anyone who I was told knew her, I sort of tried to make contact with. And I was introduced to someone who I think you'll know well, called Rubin, who had written this book in the 80s called Dream Sharing. And while he was researching that book, I think he was in New York, and he'd come across Charlotte's book. And he wrote to her and asked if he could republish it in English. It had been in English in 1968, published for the first time and then not published again. And she said yes, and she gave him the right. So I was talking to Robin. It was again during, I think, second lockdown. And it turned out Robin just lives streets away from me in London. Like literally, I could see his house. I think virtually I can see the top of his house from where I was sitting on top of my house, zooming. And he said, yes, I've got the rights, but I think I've lost them. I don't know where they are. I don't know where. I think I threw them away, maybe. I was like, okay. Well, I don't really know about publishing, but I thought, I put the phone down or finished the Zoom, and I thought, I'll just keep this in mind. We still don't know where the rights are for the English. They disappeared. I wasn't looking to publish it, but I kind of thought it will help the film if I can get it republished, or if it gets if it gets republished. So Robin obviously had these rights but had lost them. So a few weeks, months went by, and I thought, surely nobody really throws rights away. Surely you just file them somewhere. And so I went back to him and said to him, could you look for those rights and let's have a coffee because we're neighbours. And we met for coffee just off Portobello Road, and he turned up and he had the rights and he handed them to me, and he said, I'm not going to do anything with them now. You do something. So it was quite easy to get this book republished because it is a classic, and 3 publishers were interested in it, and Princeton took it. We were looking for someone to write the foreword, and we ended up approaching Iraqi American poet called Dunya Mikhail. So it's a long route for me to talk about poeticism, but she's a poet, and she had a similar experience to Charlotte in a way. She had been opposed to the regime in Iraq, and I guess on the watch list, it was dangerous for her to remain in the country under Saddam Hussein. So she'd left and gone to America in the 90s. But her foreword is it's really sort of beautifully written, and it talks about the kind of poetry of these dreams. And I think the kind of literary character, the way that you can kind of unpack them, and the way that Charlotte weaves her own narrative and sort of understanding. She's really against psychoanalysis. She's just doesn't. She calls it. I don't remember. She's got a word for it. Sort of indulgent. She didn't like Freud, but she does unpack them in a beautiful way, like a literary critic, but more so, with more understanding, having lived it. And she was really into literature anyway, so she just draws these incredibly interesting, insightful threads through what those motifs it might mean and how their repetition was sort of really built up a very powerful sense of what people were experiencing, both in their external life and in their private life and in their dreams, which were no longer private. So that hard thing was that, I think a German officer had said, the only place where you have a private life is in your dreams. And she said, no longer. Even our dreams are invaded by the regime. Even these dreams are almost dictated by the dictatorship. That's how deeply it got into our psyche and controlled us in the end.
Wow, that's an amazing statement, actually. That is so powerful. How are you, how's this going to play out in the film? What's the sort of format of you displaying her work and talking about her? Is it a documentary? Is it a drama? How are you doing it?
Well, I'm a documentary maker, so I've moved from it being a sort of fairly straight documentary of sort of, other people telling her story and commenting on the dreams and how they kind of, reflect on history and on the present. And then it's kind of morphed and moved into probably a kind of animated drama based on real events. Charlotte, there's quite a substantial archive in Marbach in Germany, where the German Literature Archive is, and along with the greats of German literature are 13 boxes of Charlotte's life, letters, manuscripts, transcripts, etc. She wrote a lot, actually, and she was a commentator for German radio in the 60s. That was part of finding her voice again. So there's a lot, and she writes well, and there's lots of interviews about the book that she did for some German television, but a lot for German radio, and various other bits and pieces that I am starting to weave together into a kind of narrative so a sort of first-person telling of her story. And then the dreams will come to life through a kind of animation approach, and we might have some live action. There's all sorts of discussion at the moment about how we sort of bring this story to life, but it's a sort of blend between animation and live action.
Oh, it sounds lovely, Amanda. I really, really look forward to its release when it all comes together. And when is the Third Reich of Dreams going to be published by Princeton? Is it out now? Can we buy it, or is that scheduled for later on?
No, it was published in the spring, and so it's been out for about 6 months. It'll probably go into paperback next year. There's a radio documentary for Holocaust Memorial Day for on BBC 4. I think that's the 27th of January, 2026. But it's published in May, and it's been incredibly well reviewed, and very extensively so in America and here by all the broadsheets. I wish it weren't so in a way, but obviously this mirrors a period in America which is not lost on anybody, the parallels of kind of the potential for how societies can change in very rapidly, actually change, and how, as you said earlier, democracy can die, certainly is under threat. And you look at the ways in which institutions are being dismantled, the way individuals are being targeted, the way groups are being othered. There's a lot to unpack here too. And Charlotte also talks about this being a kind of lesson and a warning. And even a few years ago when I first discovered it, it felt interesting as a historical document. Now it feels like a really important lesson to take note of, to understand the ways in which we conform, the ways in which we comply, and how the exterior world kind of begins to take over, really. And we're even more with social media, we're even more vulnerable to our ideas being controlled from outside.
Yeah, good, nice point.
So the kind of lesson and the warning that she talks about feels very so prescient now.
I'm left thinking, Amanda, with you saying that, what would be interesting if anybody is thinking of starting some research into, people's dreams now of in places where democracy might be newly under threat, just to see what's surfacing and whether there are parallels in that dream work between Charlotte's work and recordings and what's happening now. And yes, it'd be interesting to find out. So if anybody does know, please get in touch with us, because I would be very intrigued to see what the results of a study like that, or like Charlotte's work, it'll probably be over a period of time, but it'd be worth looking at it as as an interesting historical archive. And thank God for someone like Charlotte. I will put in the show notes, obviously, links to the book and a reminder about the Radio 4, I think it's Radio 4, isn't it? Piece that you're doing for National Holocaust Day. So we'll put that all together in the show notes. Amanda, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for coming on board today.
It's really great of you to invite me, and thank you for your interest in the book. And I hope people will draw a lot of interest from it. I think it's very rich material to sit with.
It's quite extraordinary. I mean, I was not aware of any of this. So doing the research to get ready for this podcast is it just absolutely blew my doors open. And I read that introduction that you speak of, and it was beautiful. And I'm completely drawn into the work in the book now. So you're on to something here, Amanda. And I wish you all the best in bringing this to our consciousness and bringing it to that it should reach the audiences that it needs. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I was just going to say that I was approached by Irene Javels. Irene Javels is doing a project in the States called The Way We Live Today, where she's gathering dreams at the moment. So,
thank you very much, Amanda, for that piece, for that context. Lovely. Wow. I'm left with so much about all of that, Rina. It's just, I could have spoken with Amanda for hours upon hours, particularly having a look more at some of these motifs, because, wow, doesn't that say so much about the impact of a regime. That's the word I'm looking for, a regime. What were you left with, Rina?
Exactly that. The totality of it and the drip, incremental erosion of the, or entry into the psyche, and the language that she was using, the language of trauma, of the penetrating effect of it, of the shrillness of the dreams, of the impact of depersonification of faceless entities in the dreams. It's just, it's a totalitarian regime, and it's a totalitarian experience. It's a total experience. And I really felt that viscerally as we were speaking of it. It's just quite, yes, I could have gone on for hours as well, because it hits so many layers. You have the motifs and the themes of the dream. You have her, a bookend that, and then with the creative imagination of how she's trying to bring this to life. That when she was speaking about the film that she's making and how to bring this into the current psyche of, it's just fascinating. I could have spoken to her for hours. Yes.
It was the recurrent, we talked briefly about recurrent words like shrill, but it was the word oven that really stuck with me. That the notion of somebody talking to you from an oven was such a piece of precognition for what actually happened to a lot of Jews then in the 1940s, when the concentration camps really ramped up. And I thought, wow, that was somehow or other embedded in the dreams in the 1930s, these precog material being chased through woods by stormtroopers, which is, what actually went on and happened come the 1940s. So there's a lot of depth of material, not just of what was happening in the state, but this precognitive material of what was going to happen as the state really got going and destroyed, swathes of people, from Jews to gypsies and whatever. And so the fact that it was embedded in the dreams, when you look back, fascinating for me, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. It's, and then when she brings it up to what's the environment that we're in today, it's so this idea of how do you recognize a precog dream as it's happening? What layer of that is transgenerational awakenings and reading into the current the current environment. It's very challenging, because it challenges us. Okay, so now what are you going to do with that? But also knowing that these things only have meaning with time as well. So it's very engaging. Just the subject of speaking to her about has got me, engaged on so many different levels of my mind that it's could have spoken to her for hours. Yes.
Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Rina, for joining me again for this episode. It's been a real pleasure working with you. And so everybody, sweet dreams.
Go well, everybody.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.